am a father, I'm a professor, researcher, a scholar, a podcast host, the Deconstruction Workers podcast, added on your iTunes, your Spotify. I'm all of those things, but one of the coolest things I get to do is I get to consult. I'm a consultant. As you just heard, I do some consulting for Pixar animation studios. One of the things that I do as a consultant, both with media corporations and when I deal with parents groups or with students or even with kids, one of the things that I talk about quite a bit is a very important concept that runs on a continuum. Now, before I get into that topic, I need to start off by saying I've been at this for a while. This is not my first rodeo. And because I've been at this for a while, I know that I'm about to say some things that some people in this room are not going to like. If that's you, and as I'm talking, you find you are like, I don't really like what this guy has to say, please understand from the bottom of my heart, I don't care. Here's what I have to say to you. I spend my time working with media companies to talk about the continuum from representation through appropriation through misappropriation. These three concepts are related, but they are not the same thing. So let me walk you through each one, because they get used all the time, but they get used in ways that doesn't cover what they actually are. So the first way that we deal in popular culture with the way we put people on screens is through representation. Representation is what happens when people get to tell stories about themselves, about their own culture. They get to represent who they are to the world. You can think about this as Native Americans at a powwow, for example. Native Americans get to wear their dress, they get to get in front of people and present their culture. Or, in my wheelhouse, we might talk about Black Panther. Black Panther is a black superhero. In Africa, it is a largely black cast, and it was written and directed by Ryan Coogler, who is a black person. That's representation, getting to tell stories about who you are. The second form of this is what is called appropriation. Sometimes you will see this word in newspapers and magazines. It's almost always used incorrectly. Appropriation is what happens when someone takes from someone else's culture, but they do so with respect for that culture. And most importantly, they do so in consultation with the people who are of that culture. So here you might think of, say you're a white person and you're invited to be in an Indian wedding. So you may dress in Indian garb, you may perform the Indian ceremonies, the cultural practices, but you're doing so with love and respect. You're doing so in order to best accurately portray that culture from within. It also happens defensively. So sometimes you're immersed in a culture, and so because you are the only person within that culture who looks like you have to adopt certain things about the culture you're surrounded by. So for example, Asian kids who adopt black style, black hip hop moves, black music, and so on and so forth in order to get along within the culture that they are embedded in. Again, in my wheelhouse, you might think of someone like Eminem. Eminem did grow up in South Detroit. He did grow up on the streets. He did grow up in a predominantly black culture, and therefore he appropriates that culture in ways that are respectful of the culture because it's the culture he grew up in. By the way, this is what most people of color are performing every single day in America. The third version of this is the thing called misappropriation. And misappropriation is the thing I work with media corporations to stamp out. Misappropriation is what happens when you take from another culture with little to no regard for the impact that that theft has on that culture. And it's almost always done for personal benefit without any care at all about the culture you're taking from. This is, for example, Beyonce or Katy Perry. or Iggy Azalea, or Pharrell, or Julianne Hough, or any one of a number of white kids I saw at a music festival, or any one of a number of people I see every single Halloween in costumes so offensive they hardly bear talking about. Misappropriation is a problem. It's a problem when you don't understand the things you are stealing from somebody else. And it's even more of a problem when you are then in a position to create culture for the world. Because when you control the means of production, you get to control the narrative. If I make the movies, I get to decide what's in them. And so it's incumbent upon me to understand how I'm representing other people in the things that I make. This is why it's important who gets to tell the story. It's important, for example, that Jessica Jones, a story about a female superhero, the entire second season of Jessica Jones, every single episode was written by a woman, every single episode was directed by a woman, and it has a different vibe than most superhero stories, which are written and directed by men. It's why Patty Jenkins directing Wonder Woman matters, because it's a different kind of story. It's why it matters, for example, that the misappropriation abomination, that is Pocahontas, that I grew up on, is a vastly different film than something like Moana. Pocahontas was made without any regard whatsoever for the lives and feelings of Native American people. Disney spent hundreds of thousands of dollars flying directors, producers, and animators all over different countries in Polynesia to talk to the people there, to draw the people there, to draw with the people there, to ensure that they were accurately portraying Polynesian culture. And no, it does not represent any one Polynesian culture, but it wasn't supposed to. It was supposed to represent all Polynesian cultures. And they made very sure that they were not misappropriating, but appropriating, and appropriating with respect. That matters. Matters who gets to tell the stories. A film like Crazy Rich Asians is important. It's important because it's a story about Asian people told by Asian people. So, to recap, this, good. This, acceptable. This little guy wanted to be Neil deGrasse Tyson for his school project. This, by the way, is how you look like somebody who doesn't look like you without doing blackface. I promise you it's possible. This, misappropriation, we need to kill it with fire and salt the ashes. It matters who tells the story. We're supposed to care about people who don't look like us. The culture we consume is the people that we are. Thanks for hanging out with me.